We will now change our focus to the actual design of research cases, and we will begin by looking at the simplest of the research case design approaches, which is the single case design. We will begin by looking at the simplest design, a single case at a single point in time, sometimes referred to as the snapshot design. We will then talk about longitudinal designs where a case is observed over time and we try to understand the effect that changes have on outcomes throughout the period. Then we will just turn to a quick overview of the two papers you'll look at. The first is GIFIX, which is the Joint Interagency Field Explorations, a program run by the Naval Postgraduate School. And then we will take a look at a case that I did not write on small business networking that provides an example of a longitudinal study. From a research standpoint, the single site, single point in time case is among the hardest to justify, just because it's so difficult to figure out what, if anything, can be generalized from it. Nevertheless, the single snapshot can be used for certain purposes. One, it might describe an interesting situation. That in itself might be enough. That would make a good example case, not necessarily a good research case, because research cases almost always involve theory. It could illustrate best practices. Again, something that might be very interesting to individuals in practice, but again, hard to justify from a theoretical perspective. If the audience consists of experts, then they may be able to read the case and tease things out of it and gain insights to it. Again, not necessarily a key research objective. A snapshot could be part of a collection of observations that is assembled later. I actually talk about pattern case designs where the goal is the creation of a collection of observations, but single cases could later be used for that purpose. I would say the most useful thing that a single snapshot can do is as a way of contrasting or illustrating conceptual schemes, which is what I frequently refer to instead of theory, since I think we tend to overuse the term theory. So, for example, the Cuban Missile Crisis by Graham Allison that I mentioned in a previous presentation took a single case study and then triangulated it using three different theories. Another thing that a single case can be used for is to provide evidence of the limited generalizability of a particular theory or the degree to which the theory generalizes in situations beyond where it was originally investigated. Most often this is done in replicated case research, but it's also possible to use individual cases to form a replication of cases that are already in existence. So these are all reasons why you might consider developing a single case. And remember that the first three of these reasons would not be something that practice would discount. So that if you're doing research with the goal of impacting practice, a single case may be a good way of doing it. It's just going to be harder to get that published in a journal if you're trying to do academic research. A longitudinal case study takes a single site but looks at it at multiple points in time. So you can think of it as being a series of case studies where you take your original observation, then something happens in the environment that changes the situation. You look at the outcome, and then you take another observation, and you can continue with this observe, change, for as long as the longitudinal case persists. And in each one of these changes, you can look at as sort of an experiment or a quasi-experiment, because if you can localize the change to a specific factor, then all the other factors are likely to remain the same, at least initially. And so it basically gives you something that's a lot like an experiment. So a longitudinal case like this can be quite a powerful tool. The first reading in this section is the JIFIX case, Joint Interagency Field Explorations, which is an event run by the Naval Postgraduate School several times a year, in which individuals, both from the military and from the civilian sector, bring their technologies and processes to a remote location in California called Camp Roberts, and basically demonstrate them, and more importantly, try to work with each other to figure how to get them to interoperate and figure out new uses. So in many cases, the technology might have potential uses in the military or disaster recovery areas, and so they'll have potential users of the technology come and take a look at them. And it's not a sales event, it's an event that specifically allows demonstrations, tests, and collaborations. So the event is described within the case. They strongly encourage experimentation, and they revel in failure, because failure means that we tried something that was too hard, but we might learn from it and try something else again. The particular case study focuses on informing science theory, and essentially the theory that is being tested in this case is the notion that if we are going to inform in a very extrinsically complex environment, it is absolutely critical that we build channels through which peers communicate with each other, and that we don't try to centralize the informing, because the idea is once you've got many peaks, there are just too many paths from peak to peak to essentially lay out each one. It's just too complicated, i.e. it's got too high an intrinsic complexity. So that's the basic theory being tested. And when you look at the case, you should try to notice the different triangulations. A lot of different types of data were gathered. It's important that you don't just sit down and try to read the whole case. I cannot imagine a worse fate. But instead, what I recommend doing, and this is true for all the readings, is that you open up the quiz and then use the quiz to kind of direct your attention to different areas of the case. You'll get through it a lot faster that way. And your interest at this point should not be on the case's findings so much as the way the case was actually designed. And so this is what I recommend, and this is actually what I recommend for all the readings. The second case is a case on small business network theory that appeared in the Engaged Management Review. And I did not write this case. I was not involved in this case, but it does provide an interesting look at a longitudinal study. And it was developed by a DBA from Georgia State University. It looks at how a small nonprofit business is evolving over time. It's built around actor network theory, otherwise known as ANT, which looks at organizations and interprets their behavior as a consequence of interactions between agents. And one of the things that's interesting about ant theory is that when it talks about agents, it's not just talking about individuals, it's talking about things like a deck of PowerPoint slides, which seems to take on a life of its own. And really, the case might be viewed as a test or a demonstration of actor network theory. Once again, this is a case study that you shouldn't try to read the entire case. I was a peer reviewer for this case and had to read it many, many times. It's not necessarily that easy a read, but what I want you to do is to look for things that are highlighted by the questions in the quiz and use that as a basis for answering them.